it is hard to deal with the rejection, and it really makes you doubt your worth. My mindset kind of shifted, and I went towards, okay, a job is a job, and I can utilize it, and I can grow different skill sets that can be applied to somewhere else.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another live recording of the Next Step podcast, our LinkedIn live discussion, where we bring on SMD graduate school alumni to discuss their graduate school experience as well as their career journeys. And we're excited to have Nazish Jeffery join us here in just a minute. But first, before we bring her on, just a few housekeeping items here at the top, as always. First, I'm Jeff Kozlowski. I'm a marketing communications manager here. I support SMD's graduate education and postdoctoral affairs. Wanted to just remind folks that we are now turning these live discussions into a podcast. It's called the Next Step Podcast, and it lives on YouTube and YouTube Music, Spotify, and Apple. And so if you're interested in checking some of the previous episodes out, you can scan that QR code right there, or search, wherever you listen to your podcast and hear some of our previous conversations. I'd like to also remind folks, if you are tuning in live, we welcome your questions and comments. So we'll be monitoring those throughout, and we'll try to get to those, as many of those as we can. If you are watching live right now, I see we have a few folks tuning in. Go ahead and drop in the comments if you'd like, where you're tuning in from, who you are, and maybe if you're affiliated with U of R, let us know that as well. Always like to get a feel for who's watching. But if you can't join us live, or you can't stay the whole time, from beginning to end, this conversation will live on as a replay on LinkedIn immediately after we finish up here. So you can always go back, and if you think of questions after the fact, you can always drop them there. We're always monitoring comments and questions from our community, so we'll do our best to get back to you. All right, now Nazish Jeffery, she's a 2021 graduate of our Biochem and Biophysics program, now Bioeconomy Policy Manager at the Federation of American Scientists, which is based in Washington, D.C., but she has recently returned to the Rochester area in a remote capacity. So let's bring her on. Nazish, there you are. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. How is Rochester treating you now that you are back in the area?
I was gone for about 2 years, and I did start really missing it at the end, which is a little surprising to me. You wouldn't think you'd miss the cold, but you sometimes do.
I know. You could do in DC, you get the nice four seasons like you do here, but yeah, definitely a different feel, different city in general. I'm from that area, and one thing that I always I go back to is just the sheer amount of people. Like, no, I loved my time in DC, but oh man, the traffic here is like non-existent compared to that area, and I
Oh,
love
yeah.
it.
Before this, I was in Boston. Between the traffic in Boston and Virginia,
Mm.
Rochester's just so much better in that regard.
Yes, it is. Well, I know I did a quick introduction there at the top, and I see Gaia. Thank you for commenting and joining us, a second year PhD student here in translational biomedical science. Been interested in science policy, and lately have been wondering how it would be as a career choice. So I am sure we'll get into that. So Gaia, you are in the right place. Uh, Nazish, I know I did a short intro there at the top, but if you could elaborate on that a little bit, just let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, happy to. Like Jeff said, I'm the Bioeconomy Policy Manager at the Federation of American Scientists now. But previously, I started off as a graduate student in the Biophysics and Biochemistry program here at U of R. Um, did my PhD in the lab of Dr. Michael Boldro, working on histones and blood maturation. Um, and then from there, after I got my PhD, I actually went into industry right off the bat. But I was in process development for about a year as a scientist. During that time, I really gained a lot of insight and really understanding of like what industry is actually like. And I really think that has benefited my career progression as well. because it not only like solidified my understanding that I really do love science, but I like the translation of science a little bit more. And so it kind of like pushed me into pursuing what my passion was, which was science policy. And that's kind of how I ended up here.
And what exactly does the Federation of American Scientists do?
We are a nonprofit think tank, essentially. What I like to say is that we are more doers than thinkers. We do a lot of thinking, but we also try and implement a lot of what experts we bring into the conversation are trying to achieve. We do a lot of our own thinking and ideating about how policies should be looking like and shaping like for the federal government. Um, the biggest thing I think is that we're bridge builders between communities, especially for the people that are working in academia or in industry in the sciences, and helping them, voice their challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis or in the field that they're in, and potentially helping them figure out ways that government can come and step in and help alleviate those problems or provide more funding, or provide more opportunities for innovation.
All right, awesome. And let's take it back a few years. Talk a little bit about how you discovered Rochester and what ultimately made you want to pursue your graduate studies here.
Yeah. So I'm a diehard Rochester fan. I was born and bred here. Grew up in Henrietta. Went to Rush Henrietta senior high school, and then U of R has always been a staple in the community. I did my bachelor's degree at St. John Fisher, and then after that, I kind of took about a year sabbatical. Decided to try other things. Was still figuring out, is science the path forward? Do I want to go for my graduate education? Pretty quickly, that answer was yes. I do love science a lot, and I miss being in school. So I kind of applied to schools in the area: Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, a few in other states, but they weren't my main choices. I like being close to family and friends. Um, and then once I was accepted into U of R, it was kind of a no-brainer that it made sense to stay here.
Okay, and can you touch on just a little bit of your graduate school experience while you were here? Because I know you took advantage of last time we spoke, we talked about just some of the events you attended and things you did that sort of helped push you in the direction
Mhm.
of science policy. So can you talk about some of the things you did while you were here, that kind of helped your experience and ultimately helped put you on that career path that you wanted?
Yeah. So at that time when I was in graduate school, U of R had the UR Best program, which was a program designed around introducing different career paths to graduate students. And I believe this was either NIH or NSF funded. So it was a big shift, um, and a big incentive from, academia is not the final path. And throughout this program, they brought in a lot of other people, similar to what we're doing here, from different career paths with their PhD, and just had these career discussions about, who are they, what are they doing, how did they get to where they're going. And one of these career discussions that I attended was around science policy. And this was my first introduction to the concept and what it is. And I never knew that this was even a thing before my graduate school experience, because I never thought, I've always had like a political interest. I like policy work. I like the analysis that goes into it, but I never thought, there's a way to combine those two things together, science and policy. And then here's this person talking about doing science policy on a day-to-day basis. And it was like, oh, I can have the cake and eat it too, it sounds like. Um, I will say though that this person that they brought in was actually like the least inspiring person to like motivate you to go into science policy, because her, like, good for her, but her career path was very luck based. It was like, I applied for this and I got it. There was no struggle. There was no, real effort. I just made my way into the community and they accepted me and I was able to move upwards and onwards. And my journey is a lot different than that. Um, Especially being a person of color, I feel like there's additional struggles that come into play with this that I've had to face, especially in this field of work. And I think it's different, and I would happy to talk more about that, maybe a little bit later on as well. But basically, from that introduction to science policy, I started looking into it more. Did a quick Google search, found a few organizations, more specifically the National Science Policy Network, where it was about graduate students trying to enter the world of science policy. And so I joined those communities. Um, they had funding to start your own science policy club
Mm.
at whatever university or institution that you were in. And so between applying through GEPA and through applying through NSPN, I was able to get some funding and start the Science Policy Initiative, or Your Spy. Not sure where that's at right now, but I hope it's still alive and going. Um, but during my time there, I had a great cohort of colleagues that were in this world with me. We were just trying to, wade through, what does this mean? What does it look like for graduate students to do science policy? And that meant interacting with the government affairs folks at for U of R. It meant talking to different entities and bringing in people and hosting events and just letting people know that this is an option and there's a way to get experience in it. Um, and I was very lucky to have a mentor that was very supportive of these alternate career paths. And he understood that, like, academia and writing grants for the rest of my life was not it for me. And so I was very lucky that he was very supportive in everything that I was pursuing, and he cheered me on in every step of the way, honestly. Um, and then from there, I kind of just took more initiative and started being like, if I'm ever in DC, I'm going to make sure I reach out to a few organizations, start making connections, and talk to people, understand what this world is like. Is this something I really want to pursue in the future? Um, and during that time, I did an internship also through UR Best at the American Institute of Biological Sciences, where I was a science policy intern. And I was working specifically on the bioeconomy, which is now what my day-to-day job is and where I got that initial experience from.
That's awesome. A couple of things there. You hit on just the importance of taking advantage of some of the resources available here while you're in grad school. 'Cause, while maybe the speaker wasn't the biggest advocate, you learned about a career that you had no idea existed before that event. And I've heard that from several alums that we've interviewed on this um, series, as well as just for other projects. Like, they, the career they're in now, they had no idea existed before they came to graduate school. So, but that just shows the importance of attending these. We're now my hub events, just the career stories and connecting with alumni that have been through it. And there's, like we were talking about before we went live, there are so, people may have the same job titles or same careers, but the path there is so different most of the time. So, definitely take advantage of the resources while you're here. And so, yeah, going back, to the career stories event you attended, and while, yeah, it sounds like, okay, they applied, it was luck, and they got the job. That's certainly not the experience for most folks searching for positions, I'm sure, especially in this field. So, you mentioned you did have that struggle. Can you go into a little bit more about what it was like breaking into the science policy space? It wasn't easy, as you mentioned in previous conversations we had. So, what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so there are a few opportunities out there, especially fellowships for breaking into science policy, which is supposed to be a way to make things a little easier. But those fellowships are not many and they're very competitive. And a lot of the people that apply for these science policy fellowships, like the AAAS um, Science Policy Fellowship and the Mirzayan Fellowship from the National Academies, they're very competitive, and more senior folks tend to apply and get in. And so, as still in graduate school person applying for these, I wasn't getting much luck. I wasn't getting these fellowships. I wasn't getting these opportunities to expand and elaborate on my experience. So when I went into the workforce, I had this minimal amount of experience of creating a science policy club, doing a few trips to the Hill, doing the internship, which was a huge advantage for me. And that was in support, completely supported by the university. Um, and if I hadn't had that internship, I think my journey into this field would have been a lot harder than it
Mhm.
ended up being. But right after graduate school, it was a struggle because my goal from the start was I don't want to do a postdoc. and I don't necessarily want to go into industry. If I can start off straight in the science policy field, that would be my preferred state. And so I was applying for jobs, a lot of jobs, as we all know, that struggle can be. And I was getting interviews, I was getting callbacks, and people would talk to me, and then they would start realizing, oh, she doesn't have a fellowship under her name. She doesn't have as much experience as what we're looking for. And so I would get through like halfway through the interview process and then be like, hey, thank you for your time, but we found some other candidates have a little bit more experience than you that we're going to move forward with. And this was a constant cycle for maybe like 3, 4 months. Um, and it is hard to deal with the rejection, and it really makes you doubt your worth and all the time and commitment that you had put into it, because like at the same time I'm doing a full PhD, I'm writing my thesis, I'm doing the research for my thesis, but I'm also doing the side things that are taking more of my time away, more of my personal time away from
Mhm.
doing things that I love doing. And so it was like, was this worth the struggle, since I can't even get into the field that I want to get into? Um, and so that's kind of when my mindset kind of shifted, and I went towards, okay, a job is a job, and I can utilize it and I can grow different skill sets that can be applied to somewhere else. And so I started applying for industry positions. And I was able to get my industry job pretty easily. And that was with Bluebird Bio in Cambridge in Boston. Um, and they were a fantastic company. I love my team there. They were a great group of people. The science that we were doing there was amazing. Um, but at the end of the day, I just knew that like I liked the work that I was doing. It was fulfilling, but it wasn't what I wanted to do ultimately.
Mhm.
But the skills I learned, communicating, understanding the difficulties in industry, knowing that process development was even a field that you could go into, and the different fields in industry and the different capacities, and what a CMO means and a CRO, and all those like industry terminology. That was also adding to my skill set, because I was able to go into my next interview for my current job and be like, I understand what industry is going through right now. I'm seeing it, I'm experiencing it firsthand, and I can bring that insight and knowledge into this position, which is what we're looking for and what they were looking for. And so that really helped a lot. And I think during my time in industry, it really helped me understand how to translate the skills that I had obtained during my PhD into something that was more marketable. And I kind of understood that it's all about how do you market your skill sets.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a lot of research and it's really scientific, but there's a lot of uh, other things that we're learning along the way that apply to many different jobs: program management, people management, budget management. There's a variety of skill sets that we learn that we just don't realize that we can tap into when we're looking and applying for other jobs.
That's super. So many good tips there and things to unpack. But I do want to go back to just a couple things you talked about. r- Lots of rejection. How do you just and you mentioned it's tough when you hit a lot of no's. How did you kind of pursue through that?
It's a lot of, going back to your original plan, being like, this is what my end goal is. Maybe there's a few more steps along the way before I have to get to that end goal, and kind
Mhm.
of reevaluating, what are your top priorities? My top priority was I needed to get a job. That meant I needed to shift my thinking and being like, okay, maybe there's value in industry. And then, doing some Google searches about, and there's postdoc forums and there's other forums from individuals that talk about, industry is not so bad. It at least gives you a paycheck, right? But it also provides the opportunity and the stability for you to explore different avenues that can help you pursue your other passions. And that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that too. It's you took that job in Boston almost knowing it was in hopes to be a stepping stone to the next thing, and it's okay to take a job like that,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, definitely okay to take a job like that. And I also went into that position knowing that there was a possibility that if I started this job and I was finally in industry, I might like it and I might really enjoy my time there and I might want to actually stay there for longer than I was. And I think I was okay with that, because I think there is opportunity there for me to learn and grow. And that's what my main goal at the end of the day was for this position, was to learn and grow.
Absolutely. I do just want to, let's see, I know we had a few folks chime in. um, Ashraf from Egypt joining from Spain. Awesome. Imran, postdoc at Stanford. Thanks for jumping on. Precious, prospective graduate student at University of Rochester. Love it. And Gaia, I guess, Nazish, you'll be happy to know, working on refreshing the UR Spy group slowly here.
Yay, that's great.
So I just have a couple more things. So I did just want to throw out a reminder to folks. See, we still have a few folks tuning in. If you do have questions, please drop them in the comments. We will be sure to get you an answer to those. I did just want to go back to, you mentioned just the key to your internship. Why was it such an important thing to have under your belt? What did it teach you?
Well, I think the most valuable thing in there was that it taught me that I actually liked the work.
Mm,
It's kind of scary where, like, at least in high school and undergrad, you have the ability to do like co-ops and internships and get some experience in the field that you're planning on going into and making sure that it's something that you can actually see yourself doing for the long term, right? In graduate school, we don't really get those chances or experiences nearly as much. We have our entire PhD that we need to complete, the research needs to be done, and stepping away from that is a big sacrifice. Um, and so, and it's all about funding too. Like, if you're funded through your PI, where is your internship funding going to come from? Are you just going to have to go without a paycheck for that time
mm,
period? Um, but thankfully, the university had these opportunities to help fund internships. And again, very lucky with my mentor. He was okay with me stepping away for, I think it was like a 3-month period from my graduate research work. This was near the tail end of my PhD as well. I think I was like maybe 2 or 3 years out at this point. And so I had generated data. I knew where I was going. There was hope. There was a light at the end of the tunnel for my PhD. And so I was able to step away for those 3 months and really pursue the internship and figure out that I like science policy. I like the type of work that's involved with it. I like the creative thinking and communication skills that are needed for it. And I was extremely lucky that I was able to work on the bioeconomy, which is what I'm now doing on a full-time basis. And so that was my first introduction, and real life experience is what elevated, what I like to think, what elevated my resume to the top when I applied for this position. And I also, my time on the Hill, one of my times on the Hill was through the Federation of American Scientists. He's no longer there, the person that helped me go through that process, but he was pretty influential in helping me, and he recognized my name. We were LinkedIn connections. He knew we had worked together at least once in the past. And so that helps. Networking, connecting, reaching out and trying to make those connections is really worth it.
Yeah, and I want to go back quickly to your mentor, who you said thankfully was supportive in the career path you wanted to take. Um, was that a result of conversations you had early on, or was it just that's just the way the relationship was, or were did you have to have sort of upfront conversations when you started saying like this is the route I want to go, like this is how we have to be in this agreement.
I think I got very lucky in that my mentor was very, very relaxed. I could come up to him and I was very comfortable going to him with any problem, with any issue, with any thought, random thought, bad thought, and just talking to him.
Hmm.
And so when I learned about science policy and I started pursuing it a little bit more, I was just like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. He was just like, yeah, go right ahead. And he was just fully supportive, and he knew my work ethic at that point too, right? He knew that I was going to get the work done even if I pursued some of these outside things. And building that relationship and that trust ahead of time is really important.
Yeah. And a couple last things for me. I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but on what science policy is, but would love to just hear what a typical day looks like for you. I know a lot of folks don't really have like typical days anymore necessarily. Every day is different, and that's a good thing too. But if you could talk a little bit about just like your specific job, what you're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think maybe I'll go back and maybe explain what science policy
Yes,
is a little bit too.
please.
So for me, science policy is being that bridge or that connection to the outside world I understand science really well. I understand the jargon that comes along with it. I understand what it means when things are successful, when things are not going the right way. And I know how to translate that to other stakeholders in the conversation. So, government officials, journalists, um, lay people, just people in the community and the public that don't have as big of an understanding of science as I do because of my PhD. And so science policy is kind of making those connections and bridging that gap and bringing science to the conversation and making science more um, able to be understood and worked with. And so what I do is kind of like, talk to a bunch of people in industry and academia, understand what their insights, what their challenges that they're facing within their particular fields, and then I can translate that into federal agencies that are working on certain initiatives, or talk with policymakers and be like, hey, the field is struggling with this, and here are some policy options that could potentially help alleviate that. And supporting these types of funding measures or supporting these types of initiatives is going to go a really long way for STEM, and for me, the bioeconomy specifically.
Hmm.
And so, what my day to day looks like is like you were saying, Jeff, it's different every single day, but a lot of it is talking to a lot of different people, talking to very smart, very amazing people, talking with agency folks and understanding what their priorities are and what they're struggling with, and identifying and thinking creatively on how to build these bridges and fill these knowledge gaps. How do you uh, think cleverly about what the government can and cannot do, and how do you leverage those policies and abilities to benefit science as a whole?
Awesome. So a lot of communicating. Is that something you've always been comfortable with, or I know sometimes it's communications and presenting and that doesn't come easy to a lot of people. So is that something that you had to work on, or have you always been a good communicator?
I have been a terrible communicator. I think I remember like when I first started my PhD and I gave like my very first presentation. It was probably the worst presentation I've ever given. And my time in graduate school and learning how to present my data and talk about science to my peers, sure, they were all in the same biochemistry biophysics program as me, but what I was studying was very different than what everybody else was studying. And so being able to talk about my own science in a more drawn back way, in a more broader way, was really helpful in this process. And I'm still working on my public speaking. I'm still working on communication and how do you better communicate thoughts and ideas. Science is ever evolving, our technology is ever changing, and as we continue on, things are getting more difficult to explain. And so it's always a creative challenge of how do you make someone understand. And it's a lot about reading body language too, and understanding how other people understand things and learn about things, and being able to be nimble and change how you explain things or visualize, help people visualize things. And so it's constantly growing. I'm looking to, sign up for some public speaking courses in addition. You should
Okay.
always be learning and growing. This is what I'm doing at the moment.
Awesome. If you could go back and do anything differently during your time in graduate school, what would that be?
I think I'm probably one of the few people that say that, like, I'm very happy with how my course in graduate school went.
Yeah.
I know how lucky I am to be able to say that. I have had friends that have had the complete opposite case. Um, but I thoroughly enjoyed my graduate school experience. I think there was challenges along the way, but I think I was able to grow and learn from those challenges, and it really helped me understand people as well. And so I wouldn't really change anything.
That's awesome. And any one piece of advice you'd leave trainees with today, or any last thought you want to leave us with before we wrap up in a couple minutes?
Just the best thing that you can do is talk about your science to people that don't know science. If you want to grow your communication skills, if you want to be able to better understand your own work, the best way to do it is try to explain it to someone that doesn't know any
Mm.
science at all. And there's a bunch of skill sets that helps develop, and you can leverage those in many different ways. And I'm always happy to help and talk with people and help them figure out, what does this actually mean? Where should I go next? How does this skill that I supposedly know how to do data analysis, how does this apply to something bigger?
And uh, before we wrap up here, do have just a couple quick questions. Not necessarily career related, but could help some folks out that are either new to the Rochester area or thinking about making this home for the next few years. So you're back in Rochester now, so maybe and you've been in the area for quite some time. Any particular favorite restaurant that you had back in graduate school or have now?
I think when I moved away, one of the first places I started missing was Lento.
Okay.
And their dollar oyster nights are just perfect. Can't beat it.
No, can't beat that. And what about where could people find you when you weren't in the lab? What'd you do for fun or still do for fun?
Um, I think one of the beautiful things about the University of Rochester campus is that we're right next to a park. And then we have Highland Park not too far away, and we have some great walking areas. And so if I wasn't in the lab, I was probably in those areas taking a little stroll to clear my mind, to think about science in a different perspective and different scenery.
Yes, taking those nice calming walk somewhere, right? Well, thank you, Nazish, for joining us again. This has been awesome. So much great information. If folks want to connect with you after this, where is the best place to do that?
LinkedIn probably is going to be the easiest, but I'm happy to share my work email as well.
Okay. Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, we'll maybe after this is over, drop that in the comments here so folks can reach out if they're interested. Thanks, folks, for tuning in. Those of you that tuned in live, appreciate it, and everybody commenting here and chatting with us. It's been fun. Nazish, thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Next Step podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share with other members of the University of Rochester community or anyone you think could benefit from these career stories. And we wish you nothing but the best in your own career journey. Until next time.